The expression, as American as mom and apple pie, is painted a picture of nostalgic wholesomeness since its first usage during World War II. And each May we celebrate our mothers and their contribution to our lives. But while most of them are angels of wisdom and compassion, there have been a few notorious moms in U.S. history that never earned such wings. While not all of these women were evil murderers, they do represent someone I am sure we'd all not to want to claim as our mom. And their stories just beg to be told, at least as examples of how not to receive that highly coveted Mother of the Year award. So without further ado, here are 10 of the worst moms in American history. Number 10, Alice Bishop, circa 1620 to 1648. During the 17th century, life was hard for colonial women, who were expected to perform laborious household chores starting at the break of dawn, while under the complete control of their fathers or husbands. And punishments were harsh for women who committed adultery, especially with a Native American. In the early 1600s, there were a slew of hangings and young mothers who committed infanticide to escape such scandal. However, the trial of Alice Bishop of Plymouth Colony stands out as unique in many ways. She had not committed adultery with anyone. Alice became a young widow with 2 small children, Abigail and newborn Martha, when her husband George died from an unknown cause in 1644. A few months later, her last name changed to Bishop when she remarried. Short bereavements being the norm in those days. 2 years later, her third daughter, Damaris, was born on July 22nd, 1648. A neighbor named Rachel dropped by for a visit, during which she noticed that 4-year-old Martha was still asleep on her bed during the day. Abigail handed her friend a kettle and sent her away to borrow buttermilk. When Rachel returned a short while later, her friend seemed morose, and there was a trail of blood on a ladder leading to the attic where little Martha would be found, her throat cut crosswise by a knife. Alice confessed to the crime but did not explain her actions. To this day, almost 400 years later, nobody knows for sure why Alice Bishop murdered young Martha. However, a common theory is that she suffered from severe postpartum depression. Another author Donna A. Watkins, a descendant of the Bishops, further speculates that Alice's visitor, Rachel, might have made a snide comment about the young girl still being in bed. This might have been the last straw that sent the overworked and exhausted Pilgrim woman over the edge. Number 9, Mary Ball Washington, 1708 to 1789. As a single parent, George Washington's mom had significant and positive input in his upbringing, teaching him and his siblings the importance of hard work and perseverance. George's father, Augustine, died when he was 11. Despite the fact that his mother, Mary Ball Washington, lost more than half of her late husband's estate to his sons from a previous marriage, she managed to keep a roof over her family's head. And most certainly, the strong religious beliefs she shared with them were a source of strength for her children as they approached adulthood. But as George, her eldest child, destined to become the very first U.S. president, grew up and started to spread his wings. His mother grew very possessive of him, to the point she publicly embarrassed him. At the age of 15, George chose to join the British Navy. However, his mother forbid it, an act that generated a general air of disapproval regarding Mary Washington from influential men of the day. George would eventually move to his late father's property in Mount Vernon in his early 20s, but when he attempted to join General Edward Braddock's campaign against the French in 1755, his mother hurriedly arrived at his home to vehemently dispel such notions. How embarrassing it must have been for such an eager young man to have to write to his military superiors explaining that his delayed arrival was due to his mother throwing a hissy. Beyond his embarrassment, George was also financially frustrated. His mother, per her late husband's will, should have turned over the family property, Ferry Farm, to him when he turned 21. But she had outright refused to surrender it and was keeping all proceeds from the enterprise. Yet George constantly received financial entries from her to the point that he found it difficult to pay both his bills and hers for a property which he should have been receiving income. It was hard for Mary Washington during the Revolutionary War years, with her son so far away and out of her needy grasp. Even though he had bought her a house in Fredericksburg in which to enjoy her twilight years. Consequently, the grounding moment of George's embarrassment due to his mother must have been when, in 1789, he was informed that she had petitioned to the Virginia legislature to declare indigent and made a prisoner of the state. How humiliating it must have been for the proud general to learn that his mother had just applied for public assistance. Due to his mother's inconsistent pleas for money from him, although she was much more well-off than most people of the day, George defended himself many times again against rumors that he was neglecting her. Mary Belle Washington died of cancer in 1789. Even after her death, George often felt the need to insist that he'd been a good and supportive son to his mother, against talk to the contrary. Number 8, Martha Calamity Jane Cannery, 1852 to 1903. Despite a couple of unsubstantiated claims, there have been 2 actual verified accounts that notorious sharpshooting frontierswoman Calamity Jane given birth, first to a son and then to a daughter. And to her credit, it's been said that she tried to be a good mother. Nevertheless, her lifestyle was that of a transient, cross-dressing hooligan, taking jobs such as cook, dance hall girl, or ox team driver, professional scout, Wild West performer, brothel worker, prospector, and smallpox nurse. Though when she was off duty, and quite often not, she had a side career of drinking, brawling, and waking up in a jail. It was not a lifestyle conducive to raising kids, by any means. Number 7, Kate Ma Barker, 1873 to 1935. Everyone's heard of Ma Barker and her boys, who comprised most of the Barker Carpus gang, which terrorized the Midwest and beyond during the early 1930s. Barker was not a mother who pushed education, employment, or even matters upon her 4 sons. However, they were very well versed in bank robbing, kidnapping, and murder. They also managed to garner quite a lot of fame in American folklore, especially the mother, but both Hollywood and J. Edgar Hoover played a large part in that. Various renditions of the Barkers' exploits have been the subject of many television shows and movies, often with the last name changed to something similar. As early as 1940, a mere 5 years after Barker's death, Blanche Yerka starred as Ma Webster, a mother who ruled her clan of criminals with an iron fist in the movie Queen of the Mob. We've had a Ma Jarriet. White Heat, 1949. Ma Gantry, the first episode of The Manhunter, 1974. And even Mama Fratelli in The Goonies, 1985. Actress Jean Harvey played her 3 separate times during the 1950s. The same decade that Eliot Ness, played by Robert Stack, goes up against her in the episode of The Untouchables. Number 6, Eleanor Roosevelt, 1884 to 1962. There had been a few women in American history as profound as Eleanor Roosevelt, who served as First Lady of New York from 1929 through 1932, and First Lady of the United States from 1933 through 1945. She later became active in the United Nations Commission on Human Rights and the Presidential Commission of the Statutes of Women for JFK. But despite all those achievements and many others, she frequently confessed to being ill-suited to motherhood. As a matter of fact, it's common knowledge amongst historians that she wasn't a particularly good mother. Though they'd be the first to tell you that she came from a long time of parental dysfunction. Eleanor was born into New York high society, being the niece of Teddy Roosevelt, but from the start she seemed to lack the beauty and grace such as a lifestyle demanded. Yeah, can I go back to that point where I said the niece of Teddy Roosevelt? The cousin of Franklin Delano Roosevelt? Yeah. He married his niece. But from the start, she seemed to lack the beauty and grace such a lifestyle demanded. Her mother, Anna Rebecca Hall Roosevelt, was embarrassed by her plain Jane looks and often spoke of it right in front of her, referring to her at a young age as Granny, due to her serious nature. Anna died from diphtheria when Eleanor was only 8 years old. Since her father, Elliot, was unbalanced alcoholic, she was sent off to live with her maternal grandmother. Mary, a rather strict woman who summered at the family home in Tivoli, New York. Fortunately, the house in Tivoli included 2 wild, drunken uncles. one of whom liked to shoot at the neighbors. When this became enough of safety concern for teenage Eleanor, she was sent off to private finishing school in London. Number 5, Ethel Marion Moline, 1893 to 1953. Ethel Marion Moline of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, was a frustrated vaudevillian turned housewife when she became pregnant for the third time in 1921. She had an unhappy marriage with her husband, Frank Gumm, who seemed more interested in spending time with younger men than with her. So she almost terminated the pregnancy. However, a friend of her husband's in medical school advised her that not only abortion was illegal, but it was also dangerous. Thus, Frances Ethel Gumm was born on June 10th, 1922, the youngest of 3 girls into an involved, unloving household. All right, I just want to put a quick disclaimer real quick. I know it's supposed to go before, but just so you know, I go on www.listfirst.com to find these lists. So, please don't come back at me for saying that abortion is dangerous. These are not my opinions, and these aren't my facts. These are coming from a website that I will put in the description. So if you want to go back, send backlash to someone, go send that to them, not me. Thank you. Thus, Frances Ethel Gumm. All right, Number 4, Joan Crawford, 1906 to 1977. Another pop icon culture of bad motherhood is, of course, Joan Crawford, who has been accused of adopting kids for publicity, beating the crap out of them, and screaming almost incoherently. No wire hangers, But how much of that story is true? How much of that stupid movie, ER cult classic, actually happened? More people have probably seen the movie Mama Dearest than have read the book, written by Christina Crawford, Joan Crawford's adopted daughter, in 1978. Likewise, many people probably aren't aware that besides her brother Christopher, there were 2 other girls in that household. Twins Catherine and Cynthia were adopted in 1947, and they have claimed that their older sister's story is bull. Both twins are deceased, but they have previously stated that they had no memories of any abusive behavior in the household and describes the mother as being a loving parent. They accused their sister of outright lying. Number 3, Betty Davis, 1908 to 1989. Betty Davis's daughter, Barbara B.D. Hyman, released her own celebrity tell-all book about her mother in 1985. But unlike Christina Crawford, she did it all while the woman was still alive. My mother's keeper, Hyman, alleges a childhood of domestic violence, alcoholic parents, and emotional abuse. Hyman's book came out when her mother was recovering from a stroke, yet overseas filming a movie, and upon her return, Davis was shocked to discover what her daughter had written about her. Much like in the aftermath of Mommy Dearest, friends and family members came forward to defend Davis against Hyman's claims, many of them furious over the extremely bad timing of the book's release. In her book, Hyman painted a picture of physical abuse from Gary Merrill, her stepfather, and Davis's 4th and last husband. She also described her mother as a selfish alcoholic who would fake suicide attempts to punish her children, 2 of whom she claimed had been adopted simply to be her companions. Davis institutionalized one of her adopted kids, Margaret, at the tender age of 3. She remained there for most of her life after being diagnosed with brain damage and mental disabilities. Number 2, Marie Noe, 1928 to 2016. Marie Noe of Philadelphia was rather an odd woman, who between the years of 1948 and 1968 suffocated 8 of her 10 infant children, the other 2 having died from natural causes. Each of these deaths were attributed to SIDS, or Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. Since her husband, Arthur, believed her innocence, the authorities simply played along. 30 years would pass before a local publication, the Philadelphia Magazine, read an article called Cradle to the Grave, in 1998, questioning the Noe's innocence. The author of the piece, Stephen Fried, not only interviewed the Noes, but also spoke with public officers who would quietly reopen the case. Marie was brought in for questioning the same day Fried's article ran. During the 12 hours of interrogation, she admitted smothering 4 of her babies. However, she claimed she was uncertain how the other 4 died. As to the very first murder, she stated, "He was always crying. He couldn't tell me what was bothering. He just kept crying. I took my hand and pressed his face down into the pillow until he stopped moving. Marie pled guilty to 8 counts of second-degree murder, which made for the biggest case of a maternal infanticide in history. Yet she never spent one day inside a jail cell up until her death in 2016. Wait, what? Marie was 71 years old at the time of her arrest, and she was offered a rather unusual plea agreement wherein she'd stay out of prison as long as she allowed a team of experts from around the globe to pick her brain, trying to discover what exactly makes a woman like her tick. The plea agreement was unprecedented, and instead of incarceration, she was to receive 20 years probation, serving the first 5 under house arrest. Of course, she had to be a fool and not just a murdered maniac not to jump at the offer. But she was willing to undergo widespread psychiatric examination. And number 1, Lenore Skenazy, 1959, and she's still alive. Communist Lenore Skenazy made headlines and outraged parents when in 2008 she published an article in the now-defunct New York Sun called Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone, an admission that would inspire the formation of the free-range kids movement. She allowed her son, Izzy, to ride the New York subway unsupervised because she felt he was ready for it and that there was no real danger. She believes that it is wrong to teach modern-day children that they are in constant danger whenever they go outside. She feels overprotective parents should loosen their reins and let their kids play outdoors without supervision, a philosophy that earned her the nickname America's Worst Mom. Many people called her an abusive parent, and some accused her of being insane. A few people even said they wish Izzy had had a bad experience in order to teach her a lesson. But Skenazy also had supporters, and between the two camps there was much debate. And this debate was featured on just about every news and talk show on TV and every newspaper across the U.S. and abroad.